Hello and welcome, this is Module 11 and we're looking at the science of information. I'm very excited to be here today. We talked a little bit yesterday about the DNA, RNA processes and how this is the sort of chemical underpinning of much of the information systems within the body, certainly in terms of how the body is functioning and how it rebuilds itself and builds itself in the first instance. What I didn't talk about very much was the complex way in which the DNA that sits inside the mitochondria communicates with the DNA within our cells and just how all of that works. And the title of this video is The Science of Information, and I must admit at this point that I'm going to veer away from the pure hard science view of this, because what I want to talk to you about now is actually some insight that I've had into the communication between the mitochondria and the DNA, and as I say, I have no scientific basis to actually talk to you about this, other than that this is what my intuition, my insight is telling me about what's happening. So the slim basis for the conversation is that some scientists or theorists have really been sort of contemplating the idea that wormholes can actually be very, very tiny. So when we think about wormholes, we're normally talking about galactic scale structures which allow all kinds of transfer of information and matter and energy and so on across tremendous voids of space and that type of thing. Some modern theorists have actually begun to talk about the idea that these micro wormholes could actually be, or that these wormholes, should I say, could be micro, and not only micro but titchy tiny. And what I'm finding from my insight and my intuition on the subject is that these micro wormholes are operating right down to the level of the mitochondrial DNA, so that there's a source of information coming directly into the mitochondrial DNA. In my research, I've been working very, very steadily working through this, and there are a particular chromosome pair within our own DNA, the main DNA, and also there's a particular gene, if you like, on the mitochondrial DNA. So our normal DNA is a long strand, the mitochondrial DNA is a circular formation, and one of the genes on it is particularly involved in this. I can only describe it as a communication via this type of wormhole structure, and my insight and my intuition is telling me that we're getting communication directly coming from source in via this gene. So it's gene 7 of the mitochondrial DNA, and then there's a communication going particularly from that gene to a particular pair of chromosomes within the DNA. And this is very rich. There's an extremely rich communication process going on. Okay, so going back to more normal scientific view of communication within the body, we've talked about all of that DNA type of communication, and it's very, very great and very detailed, and we've talked a little bit about how the DNA of the viruses and bacteria, parasites, fungi and so on are communicating with our own information sources of that nature, so the DNA, RNA and so on. In addition to that, we have the far more commonly thought about and talked about signalling within the body. So we're now going away from that tiny scale of the DNA and what's happening in an individual cell, and we're now going to how structures and systems within the body might communicate with one another. And obviously we have the nervous system, which is incredibly capable of sharing information from tissue to tissue, from system to system. And we have what's known as the endocrine system, or the hormonal system, which is able to transfer chemical information around the body. So the nervous system in many respects is another chemical system, and it does have an electronic component to it as well. However, the delivery of all of these neurotransmitters and that type of thing, and as the research goes, we find that the nervous tissue is behaving like an endocrine in many, many ways that we never expected, say, 20 years ago. So the rate of research in this area is quite extraordinary. However, we have some very, very well understood systems and structures of communication within the tissues, within the systems of the body, and the hormonal system, of course the immune system is another classic example, and the nervous system are really, really good examples of these types of communication systems within the body. We need now to consider the idea of the levels of consciousness. So, you know, we're talking here, I'm talking to you, this is all conscious mind stuff, so I'm giving you this information into this video, and it's all thoughts and ideas. It's at the level of consciousness that we would call the conscious mind, and a lot of it's emotional, so like it's the emotional mind as well as the intellectual mind information coming across. There's practical information coming across. All of it is at the level of the conscious mind nonetheless. So, however, we know that there is a much richer life going on than just the conscious mind. So I firstly want to have a look at the concept of the superconscious, and how we're talking about ways in which we could actually have an awareness completely outside of our system, or outside of the third dimension, or even outside of the fourth dimension, which we might consider to be thought and time. And we go outside of those dimensions and we go into the sort of multi-dimensional universe, and we have tremendous opportunities then for what you would call superconscious or supramental communication. Now, no matter how you look at this, this is a very, very rich field for what we're doing here within TRIM. So when we are working to make all of these changes within our system, or to, as many of the people that I've been talking to recently prefer, the idea that we are revealing the perfection that exists already there. So in other words, we're not making a change, all we're doing is we're taking away the mask. So however you want to actually view this, the ability of us to operate all the way from the cell up to the entire system in a communication process with a consciousness which is well above or well outside of our own consciousness, this is the superconscious approach. It is a very, very rich opportunity for us, and it becomes a very large mechanism and tool and focus within TRIM. All of the rest of the stuff that we're talking about there before, of course, is happening in the unconscious, and when you're talking to people about this type of work, people normally talk about the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. When I talk about the unconscious mind, I'm grouping together the subconscious stuff, of which some of it is thought-based, and in addition to that I'm actually adding in all of these completely unthought-related processes that are going on within the body and the actual physical body itself. So the physical body and the cell even can have its own thoughts and can have its own consciousness in that way, but then we're talking about another function of the material. So it's confusing, I know, and I do apologize for the fact that it seems like a circular argument all the time, but nonetheless the physical organs, call it a cell for example, or a structure within the cell, it's physical and it has its chemical processes. It's capable of thought, so it's now lifted itself up into this fourth dimensional activity, and in addition to that it has the potential to reach out through the superconscious type of processes and have communication well, anywhere. So the universe is the limit, and perhaps that's even putting a box around something that doesn't need to have a box. So it's a technically limitless opportunity for communication for every structure within the body. Well, that's the end of what I wanted to talk to you about today in terms of the science of information. So this is Module 11, Science, and whilst I've taken you here today outside of the bounds of science that's necessarily being taught, for example in a chemistry program or an anatomy program or in a medical school program, nonetheless it is a scientific approach. It's just looking at some of these things in a much broader sort of a context. So I hope you've found that useful. Please do post your questions up in the TRIM Facebook group, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. So thanks very much for watching.